But I want to move on, if I may, and move on to a major theme we find in Dawkins' writings, especially in this book, The God Delusion. And he uses the word delusion in a sense I think we can all accept. It is a belief that we hold in the face of the evidence, knowing that the evidence is simply not acceptable, as opposed, for example, to the word illusion, which in the writings of Freud, again, Dawkins doesn't mention this, has a slightly different meaning. I don't think that's what Dawkins has in mind. So I think there are some very interesting points to be made here. Let's look at the intellectual roots of what Dawkins says. We're going back to the 19th century. We're going back to Ludwig Feuerbach about the year 1841. Feuerbach basically argued like this: there is no God, but people believe in God, which is rather interesting because there isn't one. Therefore, there has to be a natural explanation of why people should believe in God. And Feuerbach develops this hugely influential idea that, in effect, we fashion our worldviews, we fashion our religious ideas to suit our longings. In other words, we long that certain things should be true. They aren't, but we make them to be true. So, in effect, our religious views tell us a lot about what we would like to be the case. There is no God, but we invent God because we need God to get through life. It's a consoling delusion. And again, many of you will know that Karl Marx develops the idea by arguing that this illusion results from social pressures and Sigmund Freud from internal mental pressures. A very influential approach. But there are some issues we want to look at. Number one, Feuerbach, though Freud follows him in this, basically argues that religion is a wish fulfillment. That this is a dreamlike situation. This is what we would like to be the case, even though it's not. And therefore, in effect, we invent God. Now, let's just look at that closely. It's certainly true that nothing exists because I want it to. It'd be awfully nice if I wished there to be a pile of $50 bills here, and I can wish away, but I can tell you it's not going to happen. Wishing does not make things happen. But you just think about this. Does wishing something to be so mean it cannot be so? For example, you can hear my voice getting rather dry, and I might say, wouldn't it be really rather nice if there were some water to hand so that I could do something about my throat? The point's simple. I want something. It has no bearing on whether it's there or not there. And that's an extremely important point to make against Feuerbach. But I think the really interesting thing is this. If Feuerbach is right, and I think there is a big question mark about that, then it works just as well as argument for atheism as for Christianity. We make our religious views correspond with what we want to be true. Feuerbach says people want to believe in God because they're sad people who are no-hopers, and God kind of keeps them going in the dark moments of life. But equally, those of you who are cultural historians will know that the fundamental shift in Western culture from about 1780 onwards was we don't want there to be a God because if there is no God, we can do what we like. And therefore we are liberated. We can do what we please. You think of Dostoevsky, a very famous quote he makes in his novel The Possessed, where he imagines one of his characters saying, if there is a God, I've got to do what God wants, but if there is no God, I am free to do what I please. And that's been a very fundamental motivation in Western thought. I don't think this takes us very far. If it explains Christianity, it explains atheism as well. And therefore, I don't really think it has very much to say to us. Let's move on and look at something more interesting. One of the themes that Dawkins develops throughout his works is the idea that God is a virus of the mind. Now, it's a very potent image. How many viruses do you know that are nice? You think about that. Viruses are things that screw up computers, that mess up your health. They are things that infect you. They cause chaos. And in many ways, what Dawkins is arguing is that people do not believe in God because they have rationally thought this through, but because in some way they've been infected by a very contagious, very effective virus, and they gain this from their environment or from other people who believe in God. It's an intriguing view, but it's pseudoscience. I would say pseudoscience of the worst possible order. Let's just look at this belief very carefully. First of all, why do people believe that there are viruses that cause certain diseases? Answer: because one, the experimental evidence demands this is so. There is no other way of explaining things. Number two, because you can see these viruses and determine their structure and their mode of transmission, and hence, most importantly, how you might be able to block them in certain ways within the human immunosystem. In other words, the science is there. There is no science for this idea of anything being a virus of the mind. I could show you, if I wanted to, some very elegant pictures of the tobacco mosaic virus, lots of other things, and you might be very intrigued, although actually they aren't very elegant at all. But at least you can see them. No one has ever seen a virus of the mind. So let's just press the point further. Is Dawkins saying that all ideas are viruses of the mind, or just the ones he doesn't like? It's a good question, because, of course, scientifically, as many have pointed out, there is no way of making a distinction. The way in which ideas spread in populations bears no relation to whether they are good or bad ideas, whether they are right or wrong. And in fact, Dawkins is left in a very difficult situation because he's not able to explain why it is we have to say these ideas are viruses and these ideas are just, well, ideas. And in the end, of course, Dawkins makes a subjective judgment that there are certain ideas, including, of course, primarily belief in God, which are so clearly viruses, whereas other ideas like atheism are so obviously right, they require no explanation at all. Basically, it's simply a subjective criterion, which is, I think, without any evidential foundation. So again, I don't think this idea really carries us very far. And looking at the way in which Dawkins uses this idea in the God Delusion, I think he knows that as well. But let's move on, if we may, because there's so many other things I want to cover. And I want to move on to the whole interface of science and religion.